Yep. All right. And as we speak, the players are off. We have one e4 by Zhongyi and Polina Shuvalova responds with one e5. But 100%, it's a very long match. So when you get behind in the match, you want to strike back as quickly as possible. But you also should keep in mind that there's a lot of time, and you shouldn't get upset way too early on.
At the same time, it's also interesting that if you would switch the time control and they would start with one, and then to have the 3+1, and then 5+3, then 5 minutes would be like hell of a lot of time, right? It would like,
Hmm.
okay, what should I do? I can go to the bathroom or take a bite. But now 5 minutes, as we start with 5 minutes, it is a blitz game. So you have to know your repertoire. You have to think about making surprises to the opponent. And even some players do have a repertoire for a blitz game or a rapid game because you can make suspicious moves if you think that the opponent has to be spending a lot of time on that. But so far, nothing extreme happened.
Hmm. Yeah, so far a very standard side 7 g6, aiming to fianchetto the other bishop as well on g7. And we see Tan Zhongyi going bishop to c2, overprotecting the pawn on e4 because I assume she wants to go knight f1 to g3.
I just love the bishop on b3. I know that you can't really play for tricks generally, but still to have your bishop on b3, and actually to tell you the truth, it has a little problem for me with logic because once you play a3, the main idea is to keep your bishop on that diagonal if black would go knight a5. So that a3 maybe was not needed in this situation. But as I said, in a blitz game, you want to surprise your opponent, you want to make unexpected moves, so it doesn't really matter if you waste the tempo here or there. You will go with the flow and try to pose trouble for the opponent.
Exactly. Yep. All right, so we have the move h7, h6 by Shuvalova. Maybe perhaps she was a little bit worried about a bishop coming to g5, and now bishop d3 looks a little bit awkward to all of a sudden protect that pawn on b5.
Well, it's interesting that black played a5, then she played h6, so one here, one there, now in the center, right? And to give up the center is usually not very advised because then white is really going to be taking the initiative. For example, now I think bishop b5 can be very unpleasant to put a pin over the c6 knight trying to push d5 at some point. Even d5, generally speaking, it might be a move immediately, but bishop
Hmm.
b5 is on the board. It seems to be a very unpleasant move, especially when the rook is on e8.
Yeah, so she had to play the slightly awkward looking rook to e7, but as you mentioned, she had to get out of that pin. All right, so now let's see queen c2. Looks like another nice move attacking the knight. She goes to e7, which also looks a little bit awkward for black.
Well, probably she did not have too much of a choice and she wanted to kick back the bishop to d3. I think black should try to play c5 by any means, maybe immediately. That would be a great thing for her if she can go at c5, and that's what's happening. The big question in such a position is how white can break through with e5, possibly e6, and somehow ruin black's position kingside. So, of course, e5 is the move which you just tempt to be playing, but for now, I think it's impossible because bishop captures on f3 and the e1 knight is unprotected, so then things could have been not so idle for white. A b4, asking black which line you want to be opening, and I think this favors white a lot. But probably black couldn't take with the a pawn because the c5 would be captured, bishop c4. I don't know, but I'm very happy with white's position, having these d4 and e4 central pawns.
Yeah, it looks very pleasant for white. As you mentioned, white has a very nice center here with the pawns on d4 and e4. d6 is a weakness. The pawn on a5 is a weakness. She goes knight to c6. But yeah, overall, I think Tan Zhongyi can be very happy about the outcome of the opening. So what's always difficult in these matches is that there's barely any time in between the games, right? So if someone goes wrong in the opening, you have to come up with an improvement. You have to kind of improvise, which is very difficult. You don't have time to open up your computer, look up a line. So I'm curious to see what Polina Shuvalova is going to do differently in her next black game.
Well, knight queen d2 I liked very much. The previous move by Tan. King h7, it was a kind of a must. h4, very logical, just threatening with h5. And we should never forget that the threat sometimes is more unpleasant than the execution, as the old saying goes. So e5 is always there in any kind of way, like capturing on d6 with the bishop first, and after that, bishop a6 now is a very logical move because this d3 bishop could be extremely dangerous for black after h5. So let's see if she's going to be exchanging or playing h5 anyway, doesn't care about the exchange, or wants to move away to c2 possibly.
Hmm. Yeah, she goes h5. Very nice play by Tang Zhongyi, putting pressure on the pawn on g6. Black should not play a move like g5, as then there's always tactics with e5, attacking the knight and checking the king. So she just plays queen e7, aiming to recapture on g6, but it feels like Tang Zhongyi, slowly but surely, is chipping away at the black king side.
Well, I think for the moment it's of course black is defending, and I think queen d7 has an idea to go to queen g4 at some point to defend and attack, a little bit bother the white play. But rook c1 is the last piece of the game of white's piece comes into the play. So rook c1 I like a lot because the c6 knight can be in trouble, or maybe she will have to move back knight d8 to go to e6. But probably after knight d5 would happen. So knight g4, trying to be active, looking for counterplay. It's a kind of a good post because the white pawn is not on h2 anymore, which could kick away with h3, right? So knight g4 is kind of a good active move by black.
Yeah, I like the move. As you mentioned, the knight cannot easily be kicked away. So let's see what white's going to do. She can always take on g6, but as you mentioned before, very often the threat is stronger than the execution, because if you do that too early, black recaptures with the f-pawn and can try to use that f-file herself. Rook e2, which the computer doesn't like, I guess to me looks quite logical, as the rook is headed to c2 to put more
I
pressure on the
have
knight.
I have the feeling that there might have been something more powerful. That was the issue. I thought to play actually rook c4 and double the rook on the c file that way. The only problem white can have right now that suddenly those pawns a4 and b4 cross the half line, and it can be a very serious problem and very serious. Actually, a3 was maybe possible, giving up the knight, and a2. I'm not sure it was not possible, but now you can see that knight b3 comes there, so the knight becomes someone who is disturbing white's position, and of course the a passed pawn can give trouble for white.
Yeah, no, 100%. Shuvalova is doing a great job creating some counterplay here. Now, here, white has the interesting option to go rook to c7 and potentially give up two rooks for the queen, but you also take the pawn on d6. Judith, what do you think of that exchange?
I was just thinking about it before you started to say this, but after bishop moving to d6, then rook c1 check is a very important tempo, I think, for black. And then white has to come back knight f1, and then really the a passed pawn can give a lot of trouble. So I would be very scared to go rook c7. Knight h4 is
Hmm.
something that I had in mind for some time, that somehow to play e5 and knight g6, but I'm afraid that it's not such a crazy threat. I mean, knight g6 is not threatening yet. Probably e5 would be the next move, but black can go knight b3. The d4 pawn is vulnerable. So I'm not sure white is not losing material here.
Yeah. Also, g5 is, it looks very scary, but maybe it's a move to consider as well, as after e5. Maybe you just move the king. It could be wrong. It could maybe work out. Anyway, knight b3 is on the board. The computer's pointing that out as a miss, but looks like a good move. As you said, hitting the rook on c1 and the pawn on d4. Let's see what Tang Zhongyi is going to do here. By the way, an important line, I think that rook c7 runs into knight takes c1, rook takes d7, knight takes d3, and then at the end the bishop on a 4 hanging as well. She goes pawn to e5. Wow, setting the board on fire.
Well, this kind of move like e5, especially in blitz, is just so inviting that you just have to control yourself immensely. And it's not so easy. I mean, it just comes by itself to be pushing the pawn to e5. And now the real mess going around here.
Yeah, rook e1, adding some support to the e5 pawn, saving the rook, but wow, knight takes d4. Wow. Okay,
I
can't
think
white
it is
just take and take on b4? As you cannot take the bishop. That's going to hang the rook.
exactly.
I was thinking that Shuvalova was taking over control in this game, but now Tang Zhongyi might be getting the advantage again. Tang Zhongyi is very low on time, though, with only 20 seconds on her clock.
But queen c5 is completely ununderstandable. Why not queen b4 instead? But you could also see the expression of Polina that she just blundered that the queen goes to that diagonal and she cannot capture the bishop on f4. But things are speeding up, so every move can change the evaluation.
Yeah. No, the board's on fire here. A lot of pieces are hanging. The rook on e7 is under attack. So let's see what Polina is going to do here. Maybe she can just move the rook and then try to activate the queen on the next turn with something like queen h5 or queen g6. But the good thing for Polina is that she does have an extra 30 seconds on her clock to figure everything out.
Well, giving away the seventh rank, it's usually dangerous. So I would definitely check with queen c7. But actually, maybe just queen b4, attacking the g4 knight, and in the next move to go. Or what was that? It was, did I miss something?
I also don't know. Okay, so knight h4 is being played. Practically, I like white's chance because I feel like white should have the safer king. With that being said, Tom only has 4 seconds on her clock.
Yeah, at this point, it's crazy.
All right, queen c5, hitting the pawn, rook e8, bring the rook into the game. Okay, it's kind of funny. The
Actually,
pawn.
yeah, rook e8 is so important to defend your rook, so you're not going to be blundered them.
Oh, wow, and Tan just blundered. Queen c8, defending the rook and a knight on g4. Polina's up a full piece here. Can she convert?
Happen with few seconds on the clock.
Yeah, especially if the queen can somehow make it into the black position. Rook d8. I think a good decision to keep pieces on the board. Maybe queen. Oh, there might be queen d1. Queen d1 to simplify everything. Oh, queen e4, that's full queen.
Oops. Yeah, okay, we have to say that this blunder of queen e4 happened because the player probably...
Next game is getting underway. But, Judith, I think this is going to be a very close matchup. I think both players are very evenly matched, both in FIDE rating. I think they're both around like 2,500. And also in chess.com rating, they're both around 2,700.
Yes, I think Zhongyi is higher, clearly more than 50 rating points than her opponent Shuvalova. But of course, Blitz is a completely other story. And really, what form are you now in this next 2 hours? And one of the biggest thing, I think, preparation has to be done for something like this is the psychological preparation. That how do you deal with the loss? How do you deal with your mistakes? How do you deal with your blunders? Because you have to move on, right? You have half a minute, you switch, and you go for the next game. And this is a very serious difference between player to player. And this will define how good they can be, especially in this time control where really only seconds apart from the next game.
Yeah, and Judith, what did you always do throughout your career when you had a tough loss? What did you do to try to reset for the next game?
Well, first of all, I was not playing in such a speedy segment of hours competitively. At home, of course, I played plenty of blitz games. In a tournament, actually, I think I was also partly successful because I could get over on mistakes and things. Of course, it was very painful when I lost the game, whether it's rapid or classical. But I lost, I was angry, I was crying, I was whatever, but I got over it within an hour max. And then I just went for a walk. I started to focus already, leave everything behind me, and then move for the next game. Of course, when you go home, it's another story. You start evaluating, analyzing your mistakes, how deep are those mistakes, and how much you have to change. But it's not the place at the tournament that you really start to deeply analyze your mistakes. But you have to know that you say, okay, I made this mistake because I had a headache. I made a mistake because I played too fast. I made this mistake because whatever, I don't know why I did it. My opponent played well. So you clear it up in your head and then you move on for the next game.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. Yeah. Oh, wait. So, what? Knight g7?
Wow.
This. I would be very tempted to go for someone like Bishop g4 here, as I feel like the knight can easily get lost over there. But yeah,
That's
I
a
just wanted to
brave
say
move.
that's a very brave move. Yeah, but I just wanted to say I think you make a very good point that I think especially during a tournament, yeah, I think there's two ways of dealing with losses. I think you have to during a tournament you have to forget about it quickly and get ready for the next game. But as you said, at home, then really try to analyze deeply what happened. But yeah, as you said, this speedy format, you have to recover within seconds, really, as before you know the next game is already starting. So I guess, as someone who plays a lot online himself, I feel like what I often do, I maybe take like a deep breath and just focus on the next game, and just forget about the last game.
But this is very hard because you have to control your emotions. And I've seen it before with quite a few players who were extremely emotional in classical tournament. And can you imagine you play a bad move or a bad day you have in round four in classical, and after that you're not interested about the next 5 rounds because you say, okay, it doesn't matter. I ruined my tournament already, so I don't even prepare next day. I'm just going and play the way I can. So I think this is the one of the biggest issue and the biggest sign that you're really professional, that you have to be focusing a lot how to recover and how move on from your mistakes. Black has an incredible position here. Look at that, doubling the rook on the g5, attacking this poor double pawn on g3, g2. Black's b6 queen is incredible because just keeping an eye on b2. So the white queen is very much tied there. So it's a very sad story for white at the moment. So let's see how she's going to look for counter chances. Giving up the pawn.
hmm Yeah, I think a good decision to give the pawn, activating her pieces, queen f2. All right, so let's see what Tan is going to do here. She can maybe play queen c7 or just move the rook back or defend with h4. But I like queen c7. As you said, the
I
queen
like
was
queen
doing a
c7.
great. Yeah, because the queen was doing a great job keeping an eye on the pawn on b2. But now that the king is castled, it's no longer as useful anymore. So I like the fact that she's centralizing the queen a bit more now.
Now, knight g4 would be a nice move, but queen f7 and the back rank is kind of not so convenient for black. I would go king b8, trying to go
hmm
king b8. So on a7, it will be a great shelter, and then I can do more actions.
hmm Yeah, I like king b8 a lot. I also like the move that Tan just played here, queen g3, putting pressure on the pawn on g2. And after a queen trade, I'm having a hard time seeing how white can defend the pawn on e3 and the pawn on g2. Tan might just be winning another pawn here.
Actually, this rook g5, queen g3 plan was extremely powerful because the
hmm
e3 and the g2 pawn is attacked at the same time. So it's very difficult. Probably white should have played knight e2, not allowing queen g3, because the black's knight is just so powerfully defending each other on d7 and f6 that there is no counterplay and not even thinking or a shadow of a counterplay on the f5, really, for white. So now white is in big trouble because she cannot capture the queen. If she moves, the g2 is going to be falling off, then already 2 pawns down. And the main problem is that there are no tactics, no tricks to try to give difficult moments for Tan.
Yeah, Tan is just so solid here. Like I said, the two knights, and yeah, really just the call spot structure. She's holding everything together. Bishop f5, that is a move I like by Polina. She's potentially giving out the pawn on g2, but maybe she can then create some counterplay along the f file. Maybe take on d7 and take on f7.
Yeah, I think bishop f5 is good because it's an active move after all. And indeed, after queen g2, probably she wants to take the d7 and taking on f7. But still is going to be extremely difficult for her, I believe, because on the second and first rank, she's very vulnerable. And maybe the h pawn will be just move on. I mean, maybe h4 now is the best.
Yeah, h4 also makes a lot of sense. Just setting that h pawn in motion already before you capture the g2 pawn. Let's see what Ton is going to do. She has 20 extra seconds on her clock. I think she's probably spending the time looking at what happens if she does decide to take that pawn. White can take on d7, as we pointed out, and take on f7, but it feels like the black king is still perfectly safe there, as the knight is covering a lot of key squares.
Maybe white wants to go bishop h3, and that's how to defend the g2 pawn. Maybe there will be not no other way of doing so. And
hmm
it's on the board.
Bishop h3. All right, so now, I mean, yeah, if I'm up a pawn, I'm always very tempted to just trade off the queens, and that's what Ton does. King
I
e7
think
might.
I liked it better to take on g2 because now white has
Um,
a good fortress kind of setup for her.
yeah, I think that might have been a little bit more precise than king to d8, but Yeah, she's still in a great position, up a pawn, knight g4. The pawn on e3 is still weak, the pawn on g2 is still weak. So I think Tan still has excellent chance to win this one.
Yeah, she's going to play f5, bring the
Hmm.
knight, bring the king. But still, how do you progress? That will be the only challenge for black.
Yeah, exactly. F5, great move on the board. Yeah, knight df6 looks like a nice move here. And for Polina, she's just going to have to sit. That's her only hope. Just sit, hope that Tan doesn't find a way to break through. But it feels like with both knights on the board, there should be plenty of ways for black to improve the position.
Well, knight comes to e4, then that's a bad news for white. So white has to go back to c3. Exactly. And I believe that black is going to push h4, knight h5. So somehow to take away more and more space from white.
We see b4 by Shuvalova. I guess she wants to create some counterplay, maybe with a4 and b5 to try to give black some weaknesses on the queen side. But yeah, again, I feel like for the most part, she's just going to have to sit and wait and see what black's going to do.
Well, which is not too much fun, but that's the only thing what she can do. She can also do actually to come. I don't like b5 so much, but I think white will have to come back to f1, and knight e2, knight f4 looks like a nice counterplay. In that case, a5. Well,
All right.
yeah, it's not a bad idea to play on both sides and to switch sides. If a3, they just capture rook a8, rook a5, rook a3 can be a very, very tough situation for white if the rook can pin on the third rank.
Exactly. So a4, good move by Polina, trying to create some counterplay very quickly. All right, so now let's see what Ton's going to do. She can take on a4, that's an option, but then the knight takes and I guess goes to c5 very quickly. She can also go b4, but then the knight jumps back to a2, and white might be able to get a pawn back here.
Oh, knight a2 is... Rook a5 was, I think, the best, simply.
Yeah, and just get a pass b pawn.
Yes, because that rook a3 threat by black is just deadly dangerous for white.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so she's losing the pawn on c6 now, but I
But
guess rook a3
rook
would still
a3
be very
anyway.
powerful. Knight c2. But yeah, now this knight can also jump into e4, and that's what she does. And now there's ideas of, let's say, rook c4 to c3, and this looks very dangerous.
Well, it's pretty hopeless. The thing is, it's not only that you have material down, but the big question is always whether can you find any counterplay. And in this position, I mean, the c2 knight will never reach to f4 or e5 where it can be active.
I'm a
I think
little
black could
surprised.
just, yeah, by c5, right? Why to
Yeah, I'm a little
simplify?
exactly. Yeah, I really like the. And now white has a great square for d4 for her knight. Also, the rook is active, so now all of a sudden Polina has some very active drawing chances.
Well, still knight d4 is not possible because black gives mate first on d2. But the rook on a2 is not so good. I liked very much your rook c4 plan with rook c3.
Yep. All right. So knight f2. Oh wait, that's a big blunder. That's a mistake apparently. King e4 check. Now the king has to go back. Wait, apparently there's a win here for black, but I don't see it.
Probably it was knight d1 and simplify it to capturing the knight and knight e3, knight g2.
Oh,
Now
that's a
white has
point.
an active knight.
Few seconds for both players.
Well,
E3,
this can be a
F,
draw at the end if black is not paying attention.
F4,
Oh, f4. That's a bad news. That's
F4.
a
There
bad.
goes another. There goes another pawn, but only a few seconds for both players. Still, anything that can happen. King g5. All of a sudden, the knight's a
Stalemate.
little bit
There's a
trapped.
beautiful stalemate chance. Ooh,
Just
ooh, look at that. Yeah, bad news for white that couldn't give as a present the rook, so it's a stalemate.
But apparently, oh wait, wow. Black
What's going
apparently is
on?
still winning here, I guess by one move. Check
Oh,
and king h3.
well,
Alright, so this is just
yeah.
a matter of technique. You push the g-pawn. Oh, king f3, gotta be careful here. A rook f7 is often the way to do it. Or this. This also looks good. Check.
Yeah, check and you move away with king f2 and rook f3, king h2.
Wow, what a game. As Tan Zhongyi evens up the score. Judith, that game had everything. It looked almost really anything can happen.
And we see that just like practically 2 seconds, and the next game automatically started. And yes, Shuvalova cannot think about the game before. Oh, I had a chance. I shouldn't have lost it. I could save it. No, no, no. You have to think again that you're playing with black and focus right now on this game and be in the moment. Cannot be in the past.
Exactly. Yep. And we have another Zaitsev on the board. In the last game, Tan Zhongyi got a very pleasant advantage with white. So, like we said, I'm very curious to see how Tan Zhongyi is, or how Polina is going to try to switch it up a little bit.
Well, it happens many times, right? When it's a match, because it's very different than it from a tournament. Psychologically, it is very, very different. And one of the reason is because you tend to repeat the same opening, and you challenge the other one. No, I was right. I know how I improve my position, my game for the next game, right? And so we can easily see maybe the whole match is going to be about this system, and playing a little bit different and deviating here and there. Again, black gave up the center by e takes d4, but immediately she could play c5. So this is a much more concrete challenge for white, because it's again always a question whether e5 is possible, but right now it would be too early because the queen is on d1, so black would just capture it. So now white has to make a decision to go d5, which is on the board, and this is the sharpest way of continuation.
Yeah, so with d5, white is grabbing more space. She's closing down the bishop on b7, but she's opening up the bishop on g7. So this is the great thing about the Ruy Lopez. There's many different structures that you can get. And right now we're in the Benoni structure.
And it's very interesting structure, because if you look at it, black has only one defender on g7, while and now white play bishop b2 because she wants to exchange. I loved very much when I was playing these systems with white side mostly, and I liked my black square bishop because somehow there was more life in the game. But it's a way to play it, but it's a question that will you have enough time one day to move away the knight from f3, push f4, control the center, or also this a4 idea. Oh my god, look at that. A piece is gone.
Wow, and a5. The knight on b6 all of a sudden is trapped. She goes knight takes d5. She will get a few pawns, but it cannot be enough. Yeah, she just completely overlooked that move because white very rarely pushes the pawn all the way up to a5.
And the problem is that when you do some blunder like that, because her last move was bishop a8, so exactly gave the opponent to play a5 and trap the knight, that how do you deal with it, whether how much you crack, knowing that, oh, how could I do that to myself, right? Because you have the mistakes which you do, and you have those mistakes which is completely unnecessary and is just a present to your opponent. And this was that kind of present. And look at
Yep.
that. It's not only that white, sorry, it just white has a piece up, but also she has her attack, knight on e4, h5, knight h4, h6. I don't know. It just it goes all the way.
Yeah, this looks very tough for black to deal with, but I think Polina did a great. I mean, she managed it, I think, very well. She's down a piece, but she has at least two pawns. The pawn on d5 is weak as well, and it's not like black is getting checkmated right away. But I definitely saw a bit of a head shake there as soon as a5 was on the board.
Interesting way of doing it with going queen a5, pinning the queen. So knight d5 is not possible because of the queen exchange, and the d6 pawn would be gone. This is not the only way to deal with in this position, but I mean, of course, it's dead loss for black. And also, both players has a lot of time.
Hmm.
Probably now she has in mind to just take on a6.
Yeah, she probably can just take the pawn on a6. The queen should always be able to make her way out. That being said, maybe there's like rook a8. Trade off the rooks on a1 and then the knight on e4. Oh, but then the rook on e8 is hanging. I assume it works, but there's definitely some calculation to be done.
Yes, there are some tactics going on there, indeed. And that's what White is calculating. Whether can I take on a6? Is everything okay? Of course, I would also think to consider knight f6, but I think knight f6 would be exaggerating. Even though king f6, queen c3 check, black has to go back to f7, the knight takes g5, king g8, but I don't see anything more there.
Yeah. Yeah, to be honest, also, yeah, I don't see anything after king g8 either. So now we see a trade on e4. Black now has 3 pawns. Maybe that pawn on d5 could have been captured. But it feels like white definitely should be better here. The pawn on a6 is weak, and she still has attacking chances on the king side.
But I think black significantly improved her position because before she was just a piece down and passive position, and right now she only has a piece down, but at least she has activity on the queen side. Queen side is hers. It's like d4, you never know. D4, knight d5. I mean, black is kicking.
All right, so we're going to fly the results of a poll. Who will win this matchup? Because there has been a poll in the chat. Do you think Zhongyi or Polina is going to win? So let's have a look at the results. Our chat thinks that 59% of the chat thinks Tan is going to win, and 41% thinks Polina is going to win. What do you think, Judith? I mean, right now it seems like Zhongyi is having an advantage in the match.
Well, I believe it's a complete lottery, but let's say I would put right now on Tan Zhongyi.
Yeah, because it's even, and she's doing very well in this game. The pawn on g6 is so difficult to defend, as f5 is weakening this diagonal. There's always a queen c3.
Well, it was a weakening move by black, but she didn't have too much of an option. Now, knight f3, interesting that she just forced the move f5 and coming back. There is a weakness on the center on e5. So I understand, but I think white could have played a bit better because there is not a complete harmony in her pieces. For me, the a5 queen is a little bit out. At the same time, probably it's about time now finally to take on a6, yes.
Yep, great move. If she would have taken the pawn earlier, there would have always been rook a8 trapping the queen. But now is a good time to take the pawn. Maybe she can make her way to the 7 rank and attack the king. Black cannot take the knight on e5, as then the knight on b6 will be hanging. So now Tan Zhongyi is up a piece for only 2 pawns, and it feels like black's position is crumbling.
Well, absolutely. And, well, it was a threat. I would probably just go knight d5. That's what I would be thinking. Just look for activity. There, nothing else can be for black. I mean, that's already a great achievement if she can be very active. Finally, one day she can bring her knight to c3. That's a great satisfaction. You're not saving the game, but at least you have activity.
Exactly, yeah. So pawn h6 on the board. Nice move by Tan. Obviously, that pawn cannot be captured due to knight f7, and you win the queen. So king f6, wow, stepping the king up and attacking the knight once more.
I would also go king f6. I mean, okay, I'm lost. Let's make it interesting. Let's attack. Let's provoke. I mean, f4 is something that should be considered.
Yeah, nice move, solidifying the knight on e5, rook e6. Maybe at the right moment there can be a move like queen a7, threatening queen g7 with checkmate. But maybe black still has rook e7.
There are some tactics, for example, white can think of knight g4, giving up the knight, fg, rook e7, takes, and then take on b8. But then ooh, look at that, g4.
Wow, threatening
Very
g5 and
aggressive.
putting pressure on the f5 pawn. Yeah, I think that was a great line that you pointed out. G4 also a nice move by Tom. It looks tough here for Polina. I don't think black is holding this position together. I think white is just having way too many threats.
Well, fg4 I think was the only move because otherwise at some point queen h7, queen a7, rook e7, g5 could be almost checkmate. But here also it's very important that the idea I had that after rook e7 I would sacrifice possibly the knight, there is no need of sacrificing. Just simply go knight g4 check, take on exchange on e7, and the b8 rook can be taken.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't see a good way here for Polina to defend. I mean, Queen G7 is checkmate on one. Queen F7 as well. If you go Queen E7, you hang the rook on B8. So I think Tom has this one in the back. Rook E7, but now the line that you pointed out, knight takes G4. You take an E7, and then you capture the rook on. I assume you just capture the rook on B8, right?
Yes, there is no check or anything as a counterplay, but she makes it even more painful for black. Gives a check first, and the game is done. 2-1.
Yeah, great play by Ton as she takes the lead in the match. All right, so now we see knight f3 by Polina. Perhaps she didn't like the crossbot she got in the last game, so she's switching it up with a red. Is it Reti? Reti? How do you pronounce it?
I don't know. It's Reti for me. The Hungarian way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Reversed Grunfeld, right? And we have
Mm-hmm.
still less than 10 minutes from this portion of the match of 5 minutes and 3 seconds. So probably we have after this, we might have one more game. It's all theory, right? It's completely theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like both players know this theory as well.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah, all of
no, it's that just
those.
Tanjanji, she has more time than she started out.
Yeah, she's played the opening very quickly. Yeah, as you said, all of this is theory. It's a reversed Grunfeld, white putting a lot of pressure on opponent d5. Knight g4, that's a nice move to escape the threat of the bishop and attack that pawn on f2, which is a little difficult to protect here. Well, I mean, maybe, because if you go e3, now you're blocking your own bishop. Maybe there's just a move like h6 or f6.
Oh yeah, that would be too dangerous for white to put out on g5 the bishop on its own.
So Tan Zhongyi is thinking for the first time in the game, which on one hand is often a bit of a relief if your opponent is blitzing out every single move. On the other hand, it often also means that the move you made is a mistake because it was not a move that was recommended by your opponent's computer.
At first I thought it's only you mentioned and showed e3. I didn't realize that actually she played e3.
Yeah,
Oh.
e3 is on the board, and I don't see what you do with the bishop here. I think you have to go for some sort of counter sacrifice with knight takes d5, but I doubt that can be enough.
Well, what you can do is to attack the g4 knight with h3. But and
Hmm.
that's what she does. But it's kind of a little bit of desperation to me.
Yeah. All right. So let's see what Ton's gonna do. She can take the bishop on g5. She can also maybe go for a little desperado when knight takes f2. That being said, after king takes and pawn takes g5, then the pawn on d5 will be hanging. So, what do you think is the best way to proceed here, Judith?
At first, what I notice is the expression of Polina that she is torturing herself. That, oh, why did I do this? I mean, she has these thoughts. The expression on the camera, we see that she's busy. Why did I do this? And this is something that you can't really afford, I think, in a blitz game, or you shouldn't. But she's touched emotionally harder than what we can see on Tanjanji's face. That's for sure. But let's see. Instead of h takes g5, I would consider also knight f2. So to have a different structure somehow to really make some bad mess in the pawn structure. Um, Knight e4 will come. I mean, there are, or knight a4 is also possible. So I think white will have enough counterplay and to be able to simplify it.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I
think if
was
black would be.
sorry, I
Oh,
was
sorry.
scared when white played e3. It was something that I wouldn't leave my bishop out on g5.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I was very worried for Polina as well, but now it seems like she should have plenty of counterplay. Something like knight a4, as you mentioned, or knight e4, or maybe you take on d4 first. So I think she's done a good job managing the complications. Maybe black can now take the pawn on g4, as it is attacking the rook on d1 with the tempo.
Yes, but don't forget that after bishop g4, which is great because it's with tempo, but I can take your bishop on c5. Black captures back, and now again an intermediate move is possible. E takes d4, capturing the pawn because I'm doing well there, I think.
Right. So take here, then take, and pawn takes d4 would have been a nice line. All right. So we have bishop e6 on the board. Good move by Zhongyi. And after bishop e6, white captured the pawn on g5, and black took the pawn on g4, attacking the rook on d1.
Yeah, it's interesting. f7 pawn is hanging, but I think it would be not possible, or is it?
Interesting move. Yeah,
Taking.
she's at.
But what does she have in mind after bishop d1? Does she want to go knight h8? Probably she wants to go knight h8, so black has to go back with her bishop to g4 to stop bishop h3 kind of checks.
Yeah, perhaps what white can also do after bishop takes d1 is maybe just recapture with the rook, as then the rook on h8 is hanging. There's also knight takes e5, and if you move the rook to the wrong square, there's bishop to h3, and after rook h5, maybe she has the time to go for something like, actually g4, maybe bishop f3, even better. Let's put that on the board. Like, let's say black takes on d1, maybe we just recapture, attacking the rook on h8, threatening the pawn on e5, and if black goes here, then there's bishop f3, attacking the rook, and bishop g4, so white should get the exchange back.
Yeah, that's a nice line.
All right, so Tan Zhongyi was up like a minute and a half on the clock, but now she's spending that time to figure out the complications. So maybe she should just play a move like rook h5 or rook e8 right away to defend that pawn on e5.
That's a good question. Both has pluses and minuses. After rook h5, I would go f3, and when bishop goes back to e6, I have g4, which is important to push away the rook so the e5 pawn can be taken in the next move. If rook e8, then also I think f3 is possible, and if bishop goes to h5, then bishop h3 is possible. So now it's a position with a lot of tactics, needing calculation, which is obviously not simple when you have only 2 minutes on your clock.
Yeah, so let's see what Tan's gonna do. She does still have great potential for her position, as she has the bishop pair. Well, she does decide to take on d1, and Polina instantly recaptures.
Well, maybe rook. Yeah, it's not so easy. Some simplification will happen, of course, but I think white will gain back the material.
Yep, white should be able to at least get a pawn back. Like we said, in some lines, the exchange. So now Tan has to figure out, like, hey, what does she want to give back? Does she want to give back an exchange? Does she just want to give back the pawn on e5? In case white takes the pawn on e5, you might also have to give the pawn on d4. Right now, Tan is falling a minute behind on the clock.
Obviously, it shows that she's in a position where she would definitely desperately need time, and that's the only thing she does not have.
All right, so rook h8, bishop h3 check played quickly, as now white is getting back the exchange. And let's see what Tan's going to do. Is she going to take the knight on f7 or just take the bishop?
Well, Shuvalova played very well the last few moves. She shuffled things, and black misplayed it a bit. And now she has quite a good situation.
Yep, all right, so she takes the rook on c8. Let's see what Tan's going to do. I mean, I think king takes f7 is the easier move, as the bishop is under attack. And you also take the pawn on e3. So I think we're just headed for an equal endgame. Black will eventually get the pawn back, probably plan the bishop on d4. And I don't think there's much either side can do here.
Well, black is just capturing on e3, and white had not too much to do because it was clear that it will happen. And d4 square for the bishop. What an outpost for the bishop. So, obviously white has to play bishop on e4. That's where it stays the best. So rook c1, I think maybe. Yeah, that's what we have. Very logical. Probably black will go rook f8.
Hmm. And Polina quickly moved her rook to c2, indicating, I think, that she wants to keep this game going. If she wanted to make a draw, maybe she could have also offered a rook trade with someone like rook f1. But she's giving play, which I quite like. Now maybe king h3 to g4 is an idea, or pushing these pawns up the board on the queen side.
Yeah. I mean, if I would ask you, which color would you rather play with? White or black?
I mean, I'd say right now it's probably just headed for a draw, but I thought definitely white still had some chances. But I'd say right now maybe white, the pawn on g5 is a little bit weak, and for black it's going to be hard to push that e pawn. So I'd have a slight preference for white. What do you think?
For some reason, I also somehow I feel that I would rather play it with white. It's not that I would have anything special. At the same time, I have no idea why I'm saying that, because the white bishop is also like stuck there. Because once you move there, rook f2 will be attacking on the second rank. So, and the bishop from e3 just defends the a7, g5. Everything is defended. So, but still, I think, rather play it with white b4, a4. I mean, now maybe we see a draw because it's going to be chasing the rook f7, f8. Black playing 4 more.
Yeah, king d6. She keeps the rooks on the board, playing the position. All right, so b4 white pushing up the pawns. But Polina also now has a little bit more time.
Yeah, but by king d6, we see that black is playing 4 more. She thinks that there is some chance, or she has more chances than the opponent. Interesting, because she has much less time. And
yeah, I'm also surprised by that decision. I thought, like, hey, since she's up in the match, she's down on time. I thought that she was just going to take the draw, but she's keeping the game going.
With 10 seconds on her clock. Very strange.
Rook d3. It's a little awkward to defend the pawn a4, rook d4. But now she's giving up the pawn on a7.
But, okay. I just thought for a second that after rook a7, g4 is possible. But, well, now it's a little shaky for white. Oh my god.
g4? Oh, all of a sudden is winning.
Oh, yeah. Check, bishop g3. Oh my. Oh, yeah.
What a game. What a game. I thought it was just headed for a draw, but Zhongyi takes a 2-point lead. Wow, who would have expected that?
But look at this. Look at this. This might be a crucial moment of the match, at least for this portion for sure. And we finished this portion, if I understand it correctly, with 3-1 of the lead of Zhongyi, right? Because she could make just a simple exchanging the rook and making a draw. But she went on with one of third time compared to her opponent, playing king d6 just to give the opportunity